and welcome to Cyberside Chats. My name is Sherry Davidoff.
I am Matt Duran.
And we are from LMG Security. And today we're going to talk about the fact that Microsoft was down again. On Saturday, Saturday, March 1st. So thousands of people, tens of thousands of people reported this and then went outside and enjoyed their Saturday. No, but in all seriousness, of course, there's organizations that are 24/7, like hospitals, for example. And so this was really impactful, particularly around the United States. This hit LA, Chicago, New York, and other areas. And I'm sure if it had happened midweek, it would have been more impactful, correct?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Down Detector showcased like 37,000 complaints that it was down in that little brief period of time.
Yeah, and this is not the first time that Microsoft has been down this year.
No.
I mean, we had those big Azure outages, right, in January, and then what else do we have?
We've seen SharePoint outages. We've seen Teams go down. Like it's Microsoft. They go offline sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
So we need to plan for this. And I think this is a real challenge because, of course, so many organizations now rely on cloud vendors like Microsoft. And the other thing that happened this week is that AM Best released a report about cyber insurance statistics, what's causing the losses and who's getting the policies. And it's interesting because every time I talk to a cyber insurance person, I think they're going to be really concerned about data breaches and ransomware. And that's what you would think based on the headlines. But what do you think is the number one cause of losses?
I think the loss of business because of, downtime, business interruption.
Business interruption, totally. So what the AM Best report said was that business interruption was the number one cause of losses, 25% of claims. But what was so fascinating to me was that even though it was 25% of the dollar loss, it actually, like incident response had 20 times more claims, like by the number of claims. But the business interruption costs per incident were way higher.
Yeah, like significantly higher.
Yeah. And it actually has been reminding me all day of this XKCD comic, which I will put in the show notes. I know you were like, why are you dragging this comic around with you? I actually printed it off. And it's an old one. It says, here's what a crypto nerd's imagination is. So here's what security professionals are thinking if you're trying to break into a laptop. His laptop's encrypted. Let's build $1 million cluster to crack it. No good. It's 4096-bit RSA. Blast. Our evil plan is foiled. So security nerds think one thing, and then in reality, here's the other frame of the comic. What would actually happen? His laptop's encrypted. Drug him and hit him with this $5 wrench until he tells us the password. Got it.
You know, that's based on a true thing that happened, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to hear more.
Well, that was the exact thing. There was a group who was trying to get cryptocurrency passwords. I think it was from like a retiree in Florida. And instead of going through the process of breaking into his laptop, they literally just drugged him and like coerced the password out of him.
Oh,
so,
interesting.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, well, based on reality. So anyway, this relates because I think a lot of us are trying to protect against, the elite nation-state actors that are going to worm their way into our systems and, the next SolarWinds. And that is important. That is important. But a lot of times what takes us down are accidents or mistakes that happen because of a supplier. And so we see with Microsoft, it was what did they say? A problematic code change?
Problematic code change.
Problematic code change that we just accidentally pushed out to all of you people.
Something got pushed out to production before it had been like thoroughly tested, and it took their system offline.
Yeah, and then we saw CrowdStrike this summer, of course. That was, I'd also call that a problematic code change.
That was a problematic code change. Yeah, that their faulty update.
Yeah, tell us more.
Well, yeah, I mean, we so, okay, for those of you who haven't heard us talk about this, we have talked about CrowdStrike a lot because of this exact reason. Like when a security vendor goes offline and they take, about 8.5 million computers offline with them, which is what happened with CrowdStrike. But it wasn't just that the CrowdStrike broke, it was who they broke along with them. And like Delta as the example.
Yes.
Like Delta had to cancel like 7,000 flights. Like you got stuck in Boston because of Delta.
It impacted my work.
Yeah. And
Boston is lovely, but still.
Well, yeah, it's a cool place, but like I'm sure you probably wanted to be home. But we also have like the picture that came from the Missoula airport with the big blue screen of death on the Delta wall back behind the check-in counter. Like it had significant downstream impacts. And when we look at a big vendor like someone like Microsoft or like Google as the example, like Google Workspace has like 50% of the like market share for cloud apps.
Yeah.
Azure has or Office 365 has like 45%. So if those two go down, like everyone is down.
Right. And that's why AM Best was saying that the biggest risk of all is that 73% of the cyber insurance policies, according to their survey, are with small businesses. $10 million or under in revenue. And they tend to rely on cloud providers.
Heavily rely.
And so there's huge widespread risk. There's huge risk, systemic risk coming from the potential for a cloud outage. Speaking of risk and losses and cost, CrowdStrike just had an update this week, didn't they?
Yeah.
Like, this is still going, you guys.
Oh yeah, no, this is still going. I mean, they even said in their earnings statement that they expect to have to spend about another $73 million like this quarter because of fallout from the attack happening, or not the attack, sorry,
Right, not an attack.
the problematic code. And I mean, there were estimates that this was, over $5 billion worth of damage because of that system going down. So, I mean,
And I'm sure that's like just finger in the wind,
Oh,
probably an
probably, yeah.
underestimate because of all those ripple effects.
Yeah, yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how the Delta lawsuit works out because they're suing CrowdStrike, right?
Oh, yeah. So there's the Delta lawsuit, and then there's a secondary lawsuit that was just filed on behalf of travelers, not the insurance company, but actual air travelers that were
like me.
Yeah, like you. That were inconvenienced by Deltas and other systems going offline. Ironically, Southwest stayed online. I don't think Southwest uses computers though, so I think that was totally fine.
I mean, it was more than an inconvenience.
Yeah.
But Delta refunded my money, so I hope Delta gets reimbursed.
But the class action lawsuits against CrowdStrike specifically in this case.
Right.
So we'll see how that one kind of goes. CrowdStrike says it lacks merit, which I think is their boilerplate legal language at this point. But.
Okay, are you worried though that if software vendors have to pay for the results of their faulty code, that they will all go out of business and we will have no more software?
I mean, it sets an interesting precedent at that point.
I think it's like, medical malpractice. Like there's a chilling effect.
Software malpractice?
Software malpractice. Okay, now we've seen plenty of other outages. Wasn't there just a big telco outage?
Yeah, AT&T. Their mobility services went offline, and this one actually impacted me specifically. Like my 5G stopped working; I couldn't send or receive phone calls.
This is your chance for therapy, man.
Oh man, I was angry about that. Well, because like I feel naked without my phone. Like I use that thing for everything, and it wasn't just me. It was like 125 million other people at the same time. And the stats on that one were pretty striking. Like it was 92 million phone calls that couldn't go through, 25,000 911 calls that couldn't go through.
Okay, so that's life or
yeah,
death.
so there's,
and like, how do you quantify that?
Well, and then the bigger problem was like AT&T. This was from like a bad configuration, they said, which I think it just means like a configuration on part of their infrastructure. But they fixed the configuration, but it still took another like 12 hours for everyone's phone to like re-authenticate with the network and actually begin to function properly. So I mean, it was a good half a day that one of the biggest telcos on the planet was basically non-functional. Like,
so that brings up two interesting issues. Like number one, the Azure issues back in January were because of configuration problems.
Yep.
So we see problematic code updates, which hopefully you can test, but it's hard to test at this scale.
Yeah.
Of course, poor Microsoft. Or also configuration changes that can lead to downstream effects. And sometimes the recovery is not simple. Like, I believe this weekend when Teams and Outlook were down, people actually had to reinstall the applications in order to regain access because they had to install a new version of that code.
Yeah, I saw a little bit on that one. It looked like there were some specific versions of Office 365 apps that just like stopped working completely.
Yeah.
And yeah, keep your software updated.
We also saw a UK banking system outage recently too.
Yeah, we were reading about that one a little bit earlier today. I mean, it wasn't just one bank; it was a bunch of banks, like 6 of the biggest banks in the UK. So Lloyd's, which most people know that name, Halifax, TSB, they went offline like right when payroll hit for a lot of their bank customers because they didn't have the infrastructure to handle how many people needed to use that system simultaneously. And it's the second consecutive month that this has happened to them. So yeah, that's problematic. You can't pay bills, can't access your account. And we expect that when we work with a big vendor like a bank, that we have availability to our money, and people just couldn't get it.
Well, and I think there's a balance between depending on technology and being prepared for an outage. Because let's face it, if a hospital provider, like some kind of technology provider or a bank's technology provider goes down, and you have to fall back to like paper and pen and old school phone systems or things like that, that's a lot of supplies and materials and training. And I think all organizations are balancing that. How much do you want to invest in those hopefully rare situations in terms of your physical supplies and your backup communication systems versus taking a risk?
Yeah, well, I mean, we talk about that when we do tabletops with hospital systems.
Yeah.
If a ransomware attack hits and your core medical management software goes offline, is there paper for the printer? Do you have pencils and pens for everyone? Like, these are questions that come up as part of their offline planning. And in those cases, in a lot of them anyway, they're kind of like required to actually test those scenarios like on a monthly basis, which I think is a great idea. I'd love to see other businesses adopt a similar kind of thing, but with their, critical infrastructure, with their cloud services. Like, do a quick test. How will you function if you don't have
Right.
access?
Well, I think communication systems are really key
Hmm.
because, when Teams is down, a lot of times remote workforces don't know how to contact each other. So you really have to think, I think number one, if you're planning for an outage, think about your communication
Mhm.
systems. Like, how are you going to communicate? I had in one of my classes at the Pacific Coast Banking School, there was a banker whose entire infrastructure was taken down. All their whole network was taken down. And they reverted back to using, I say reverted, but really they'd never done this before. They had bankers that were using their personal phones. They would write out wire transfers on paper, snap pictures with their personal phones,
Ooh.
and text it to like the one person in the back office that could call it in. And that is not something I would want to
That's-
clean up after.
That's pretty rough, yeah.
And it's great that they were able to adapt. They were down for 60 hours, but that's obviously not ideal.
No.
And so you want to think about like, what is your backup plan for communication? And I think if you can communicate, you can handle everything else.
Yeah,
I
I
might
mean,
eat those words.
that,
but I think
yeah,
so.
well, I mean, that's a big, again, these are big things we cover in the tabletops that we run. Like,
Right.
if your systems are offline, if you don't have access to Teams, how do you communicate? I mean, we had that with Slack the other day.
Yeah.
Slack went offline, and I had that like panic moment. Like, well, how do I reach out to everyone else that I work with? Forgetting that, of course, I've got phone and email and
I
everything
had
else.
the
but
best day. I was so quiet. I had so few interruptions. Okay, outages are, again, something that we really need to be prioritizing. I think the risk is just getting higher and higher when it comes to business interruption. And there was a great study by the World Economic Forum. They did a survey of CISOs and CEOs because they were saying in today's environment with these major risks of geopolitical disruptions and conflict, like what are you most concerned about? And the number one concern for CISOs was disruption of operations. It was number two for CEOs. CEOs put cyber espionage and information theft first, but CISOs were worried about disruption of operations.
Just keeping the business going.
And when you look at the dollars and cents and the insurance payouts, that makes sense. That's where we need to be thinking.
Yeah.
So let's go over our takeaways real quick. So our takeaways for today, number one, develop your communications plan. If there is an outage, make sure that your whole team has a backup communications plan. Everything else will follow. Again, I might eat those words, but I think that's like the foundation.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Number two, strengthen your vendor risk management. Make sure you know who you're relying on. It's really hard to say, hey, Microsoft, shape up. I think everybody's saying that. But for those that you are able to influence, understand when you're very reliant on Microsoft. And for any other vendors that you rely on, make sure you're vetting them and that they are carefully planning for potential outages and things like that.
Well, I mean, on that note, you want to test your actual continuity plans.
Yes.
You want to know that your BCP actually works, and that if something does go wrong and you lose access to critical infrastructure, that you have a plan for keeping your operations going, at least somehow keeping them going in the meantime, even if it's for a short amount of time.
I still run into a lot of organizations that don't have a BCP or that need their BCP updated. And I have to say, I think that artificial intelligence tools are really helpful for poking holes in your BCP and for updating them. So check that out. Make sure you are evaluating your cyber insurance coverage. Don't just blindly sign a policy. More and more, we are seeing cyber insurance providers narrowing the scope of what they will cover, of course, trying to protect themselves in the event of a widespread event. So you want to know what your coverage is. If you have an outage of Amazon or of Microsoft and you're down, maybe you'll be covered, maybe you won't. Check your policy. If you rely on a vendor and they're down because of a supplier outage, even if that impacts you, you may not have any direct coverage or recourse. So keep that in mind. Those fourth-party supplier outages can actually be really impactful.
Yeah, they can. Also, I mean, things like the Microsoft outage, we got kind of a heads up that this was going to happen. We got an early warning on this one.
We did?
A little bit. Like, we started to see those reports coming into Down Detector, and
Yeah.
it didn't hit all at the same time. There was kind of a cascade before it was really evident that.
Right.
But I mean, keeping an eye out for those early warnings is pretty important. I mean, you want to know if if you need to enable your BCP, or if you need to switch communication platforms, it's better to know a little bit ahead of time so that you can actually put that in motion rather than going from a dead stop all the way up to now having to implement these things. So again, monitor threat intelligence, keep an eye on the news. Like, it's not that difficult. You just have to keep your eye out.
Yeah, and if a major system is down, how do you communicate with everybody to let them know?
Yeah.
Finally, reduce your single points of failure. Make sure that you are thinking about implementing a fallback mechanism or multi-cloud. If you have the ability to use different tenants, might not be a bad idea.
What did Gartner call it? Cloud concentration?
Yes,
Yeah.
the risk of cloud concentration. Nice one. Nice callback.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's it for today. Obviously, business interruption is a major risk, but it is something we can plan for. So check out our takeaways and tune in next week to Cyberside Chats. Thank you guys so much.